who are the sick and shut-ins. And it seems like the list is longer now during COVID. It seems like we're having to make even more tapes. Is that just my imagination, or is that honestly your reality as well?
It is our reality. Thank you, Alvita, for leading us in this very challenging and difficult discussion, one that I feel that for people of color, the African-American community, it is one that is often shunned away from. We talk about death, we talk about COVID-19, and the reality is that we've seen, of course, many deaths in this pandemic season. I don't contribute at all to the COVID season. We are just dying, some natural deaths, some because of, unfortunately, suicide, some homicides. And so the reality of death is our reality. It is our reality that we were born into this world and we will leave one way or another. And so when it comes to theology, we have to give it a proper perspective and really lead people from being fictitious in their thoughts and in their biblical concerns, to really let them know that there is life for the believer, Christian, after death. But there's a whole gamut of conversation that goes on. So you're right. It is our reality. We've seen deaths, but I unfortunately, see deaths all the time, and walking families through sometimes can be very challenging.
And I've got several questions for you too, which we're going to get into a little bit later as well. But Chaplain Disnew, I wanted to talk to you too about how your role actually differs from the pastor's role. What do you actually do? And we were talking about that before, and I found it very interesting, the answer you gave me.
Well, pastors are the first line of defense when it comes to working with families and working with you all. Because your pastor is your covering. I believe they're the shepherd of your life, they're the shepherd of your family. And so usually if you come to the hospital and you have a loved one that's sick or ill, the first thing I know many of us do as Christians is say, let me call my pastor. And that's important because they are the covering. And not in a way that disconnects us, but sometimes your pastor may not physically be able to be there at the hospital with you at the time of an injury or illness of a loved one. And so you may be able to call a chaplain until your pastor gets there. And usually in that time, when you need someone to help you to make really difficult decisions, the hospital should have a person who is of a spiritual guidance to be a part of that difficult conversation, especially in a time of transition. And so it is so important to know your theology, like Pastor has said, about what it's like for the afterlife, but what it's like for my family here. But when you're at the hospital, or when a person is sick and your loved one is at the place where they're no longer to make decisions for themselves, there's a chaplain who is able to also provide you end-time support until your pastor can get there to be there with you.
Your role is extremely important. You know, yeah, absolutely, for both of you. Everybody's role on this panel is extremely important because once the person has passed away, the question for Audie Hines is, what do we do with the organs? And is there a procedure for, what happens if you haven't already signed up for organ donation? Are they even able to harvest them and use them? Talk to us about where you are.
At LifeNet Health is the Virginia OPO of registration for the federal government. And so at point of death, the hospital takes a position and notifies LifeNet Health here in the state of Virginia at every death. And then we are able to work with the system to see if they're under registration or not. If they are, it's a beautiful thing. An executive decision has been made for the family, and it's an opportunity to love your neighbor as we love ourselves. And so if they're not, then we have family coordinators that work with the family to give them first solace and comfort in this time of loss, but then to see the opportunity to be a blessing, even in such a sensitive time as this, because the numbers say one deceased donor can save the lives of up to 9 recipients. And so to enhance their lives and help them in the area of organ and tissue donation, there's a national pandemic called COVID-19, but there's also another pandemic amongst the African American community where the demand versus the supply when it relates to organ and tissue donation, we are in a severe deficit. And so I'm glad we're having this discussion today. We can be transparent. But since we're in the household of faith, I am a believer myself that to love your neighbor as you love yourself, that act can be executed, putting our faith and our feet together by becoming a registered donor today.
I know how important that is. We'll get into that a little bit later too. But you know, it's huge. It's so important to be a donor, and I want to get into some of the myths and some of the psychological things too coming up, because we were talking about that earlier. And it's interesting how we think. I mean, your opinion is your opinion, but when it comes to fact, you can't really fight fact. So I want to talk about that. Mrs. Morrison, people have to come to your office. Do they come before the person's passed, after the person's passed, and what do you actually do to help them?
Well, in actuality, in Portsmouth, we do tend to talk to families sometimes before someone's passed because of these workshops like we do throughout the community. Individuals will come in and ask us to take a look at their will if they've had one drawn. They may have questions about what do I need to do? My husband's ill or I'm ill and I know I need to get things in order. So we do discuss those kinds of things. But normally probate itself cannot occur until after the person has passed. We do not house wills, so that's a misconception that I want to come down and probate the will and you're still living. We cannot do that. We can only probate after the person is deceased. And a lot of things that our office people don't really understand, but property, real estate, there are only 2 ways to pass it in the state of Virginia. That's either through probate or through a deed. So probate is very important when it comes down to transactions that involve real estate.
So now that we're talking about probate, Yolanda Daughtry, you know, one of the things I have found in so many instances, and I just have this thing for the homeless, and I just want to see them have places to live, and that's always been important to me. So what I find is so many empty houses. There are just so many empty houses just sitting there, and people will say, so-and-so could use that. They could put 5 kids in that home. They could, you know, it could get people off the street. Why isn't anybody doing that? There's a reason for that.
Well, a lot of times when our parents pass away, we have heir property. And sometimes those children may live in other states. So therefore, that property just sits there. But as long as those children are paying the real estate taxes up there on that property, it's just going to stay there until those children decide to either sell it or, you know, allow someone in their family to live in there. Just because it is a vacant property, you cannot just allow someone to come in and make it a nonprofit organization. You still have to get consent to those heirs because they are the owners of that real estate.
So what's kind of the procedure? If I'm paying taxes on a home where my parents have passed away, I am legally able to go in and do what I want with it at that point?
Whatever you like to it. Yes, ma'am. It is now your property. You are the owner of that property.
Okay. Pastor, a lot of times we get, and I'm gonna ask you this question. And I want to talk to the audience too, because I forgot to tell everybody too. We have an audience too. You are the audience. You're our other co-hosts, and we want you to send in some questions. Ask us what you want to know. That's our whole point of meeting your needs. And as well, we've got some live questions too. But Pastor, how has it changed ministry, COVID-19? How has that changed? I mean, people see you preach every Sunday. You are here every Sunday. But the hundreds of thousands of people that normally listen to you, in a way, you probably get to reach more, but you don't get to see more. So how has that changed? How does that feel?
It's uncharted. We've never faced this particular pandemic before, not on the level. And I think for all of us, we're having to make shifts. And so I'm okay. I'm comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that my understanding of God helps me to embrace the uncomfortable while yet being comfortable with the uncomfortable, which means that if I can't change it, then I simply have to trust God to give me a new perspective through it, around it, and just simply be patient by using wisdom. This COVID season has really made all of us look at things differently. We're virtual church now. That will be forever. That will be as long as we're here now. People may not return. But it's also challenged us in hospitals. I wasn't able to visit those who were dying in the hospital. I was able to do some chats through our devices. But again, I wasn't able to go and really be with family, and families weren't able to go. And so that really changed some things around, and it made people really just start to ask the question about how do you think they made it to heaven? So the church has to clear up a lot of myths that we ourselves have taught about death and dying, and even in this COVID season, that is not about truth. It's more about convenience and making me feel good about something that I didn't want to happen, and that's death.
Alvernia, you are at the hospitals. Like you were saying, you're the go-between there, and you do get to visit the dead, the dying, the family members. How has COVID changed that?
Well, I like what Pastor said about becoming uncomfortable and feeling comfortable in that. I've always worked at the hospital where people are sick, but I think in this season, things became so unpredictable, where as a staff, I didn't know if I was gonna get sick. At one point, we didn't have enough protective gear. And so being with family members on the FaceTime or by iPad or by computer, and I'm at the bedside, was also a big inconvenience because they're not really my loved one. I can only love them for that moment and be as present as possible. And so that even changed hospital chaplaincy, that a lot of family members could not come into, and still cannot come into the bedside at some hospitals. And the staff, we're working with them as best as we can to provide them support that's very distant and very different from what we're used to doing.
So the difficulty of, and whoever wants to answer this question, then I want to go to one of our live guests. The difficulty of families not being able to bond, to be together, to commune, to say goodbye. I think that would, and first of all, I just want to say I'm sorry for anyone who's lost a loved one. We reached over 1 million in this country a couple of weeks ago. While Hampton Roads has a large number, other larger states like Florida, like Texas, their COVID numbers have risen exponentially. But everybody feels the same, doesn't matter where you live. Your pain is the same. The difficulty of not being able to touch your loved ones. Just watching from nursing homes, where people are watching in windows and they can only touch them through glass. That's got to be one of the hardest things. And who would like to speak to, one, how it's changed, but two, how you deal with it? Are you ever able to reconcile for the rest of your life not being able to say goodbye or to touch your loved one?
I think, yes. Separation anxiety, sheltering in place, not being able to now sit by the bedside of my loved one. All of those things will bring levels of stress, not just sickness and potential death. So we have this separation anxiety, which to deal with the diagnosis of being in the hospital and those things, looking through a glass and saying hi or bye, or on Facebook Live saying things. So those are levels of anxiety really have risen in our communities now. And unfortunately, I think that we're going to see a lot of people, if they don't get counseling in this process, because a lot of people have other emotional and mental conditions after we're finished with the COVID. We might finish with the COVID-19, but I think that you're going to see a lot of other people who just weren't able to grieve properly.
A lot of fallout.
You're going to see that. And so I think it's very important that we really talk about that separation, not being able to say goodbye. For some of us, we will say, well, you know what, we love them, they knew it, we couldn't be there. Some of us can put it in perspective. Others just wanted to be there. For example, I wasn't present at my mother or my father's death. They died at home in the same bed. I wasn't there, but because of my faith, my maturity in God, I didn't have that level of anxiety added to my level of stress over death. So we have to get to a point of, psychologically saying, I have enough to deal with. Do I need to add the guilt of not being there? And they ought not feel guilty because they couldn't be there.
So the next question is how you put that in perspective. Obviously we know it's not easy, but how doable is that, especially when you're already dealing with a lot of other things that are going on, because death allows you to become totally raw with family members, and we're going to talk about that too, because when they come down to the offices to be able to deal with those things, how do we put that in perspective?
Well, I think in one way we put it in perspective is first beginning with acknowledging the feelings. So Pastor named some of those feelings. Feeling anxious, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling afraid, I'm feeling angry. No one wants to bury anyone. Even though we know we're all going to die, we don't like to think about that, right? And then how do we reauthor that thought of, I didn't say goodbye? And how do we change that to thinking of creative ways to say goodbye? Because if we're believers, in one way I challenge myself is, because I didn't see the physical body, did I not say goodbye to all the things that this person was to me? It's a way to say goodbye that's different. I've had to say goodbye from the car. I've had to say goodbye on my knees praying. I've had to say goodbye at home. And just because I'm not there at the bedside, how do I honor the life of this person, all that they were to me, my sister, my brother, my mom, my dad, and still believe that God has them with them? And my goodbye can travel all the way to heaven. So looking at a way to reauthor and be creative in how we say goodbye to our loved ones.
Let's get to some of the audience's questions. I know I could ask you a million questions. I have a million questions. I truly do, just from myself. But I want to hear from the audience, too. So we've got someone is on the line. Give us an idea. What's your question?
If I have an advanced medical directive, will the hospital still treat my illness?
She has an advanced medical directive. Will the hospital treat her illness? That's a good question. It's a very good question. Who wants to take the answer to that?
Well, I think I can take that one. If you have an advanced medical directive, the hospital still has to treat you. I would recommend that you do an advanced medical directive just going to visit the doctor. Not under stress, and not when you're in crisis, or not when you are, or you or a family member are close to death. That adds another element of emotions. But I recommend doing an advanced medical directive on a day where you can talk to your family about things that you want in your life if you were unable to speak. But to answer the question of our guest, if you go to the hospital and you have an advanced medical directive, it does not mean that the hospital will not treat you. It's one of those myths that we have in the Black and brown community that I signed this document and that means you're not going to really take care of me. The hospital they're there to heal. They really don't rejoice because someone's passed. That's not really what they signed up to be doctors to do. So the hospital has a charge to make sure that you're as healthy as possible.
So is an advanced medical directive lots of times in place if you can't speak? Because what happens if I decide right before I go into the operating room, okay, wait a minute, I know I signed an advanced medical directive, but can you still try to keep me alive? That's probably going to be my question even if I signed one, I'll be honest.
Okay. Well, there's different elements. So if I know I'm going to have a surgery and maybe I've become a little anxious, so I want to do this advanced medical directive because it also just says that if I'm unable to speak at that time, then I know that this loved one or this friend is a person that helps to make decisions for me. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm close to death. Now, there are elements of the advanced medical directive that have that kind of feel to it. And also, there's another document that you can do with your medical physician as a do not resuscitate, which means that if your heart stops, you have already agreed that I don't want the medical team to restart my heart. But those are all things that you should talk to your physician while you can speak.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any, I know we're on Facebook Live, we're also on YouTube, and if you've got any of those questions, we'd certainly like to be able to take some of those as well. So we're letting you know early. Audie, too, we were just talking about, when we're talking about advanced medical directives, and when once somebody has passed away, is there a set of organs you need the most of?
Definitely. Here in the state, LifeNet Health, our mission lines up with our faith principles. Our mission statement clearly states we're in the business of saving lives, restoring health, and giving hope. And so when I saw the mission statement, it ran parallel with my personal faith practice. And to your point, in the state of Virginia, 46% of the organ transplant waiting lists are African Americans.
Wow.
46%. And then when you think of what particular organ that's most needed, 50% of the patients waiting for a kidney transplant in Virginia are African American. And so I started to look at the numbers, and I said, well, if 50% is that number for the kidney, which is the most prevalent need amongst African Americans, what is the number of contributions at transition? And that number is 20%. And so we have a demand and a supply conflict amongst the African American community specifically. And we know a kidney can be transplanted from any cultural group. However, there is a natural, biological, genealogical perspective that African Americans match well with other African Americans. And so
So is that true, though? I mean, if I need a kidney, does it matter that I'm not getting it from another African American?
No. The answer to that is no. We've had multiple ethnicities be able to be a donor and a recipient of organ and tissue donation. What we found, though, as it relates to shared ethnicity, it's more common that African American would be more prevalent to be a match with another African American. And so because of that, we're not participating in a process, and as believers, we say we practice to be absent from the body, is to be present with the Lord. Mm-hmm. But then when it comes to that time in our life where we take off this earthen vessel and put on our white robe, if we're not registered donors, the opportunity to make your last act your very best act of loving your neighbor as you love yourself is being missed. And it's being missed tremendously in the African American community.
So how do we get more African Americans to understand the importance of organ donation?
It's an act that is going to empower. If I'm going to be going home to glory, and I am a believer, I would make my entire being available to help another brother or sister of my ethnicity or not, to make what I had available to whomever that I can restore some health, that I can give some hope, and that I can be a part of saving a life. So oftentimes, people are living through the lives of so many other people and on the shoulders of other people. And at LifeNet Health, we take our commitment to the state of Virginia very seriously. Every death in the state of Virginia that happens in a hospital setting, we're the first persons to be notified. That's LifeNet's health commitment to you.
So pretty much every part of my being could actually be used, pretty much.
Pretty much. It's some key components, but right now, kidney, liver, pancreas are key areas of need, and African Americans are finding themselves 5 to 10 years on a waiting list that could have been prevented if only we had more educated African Americans that decided, I want to be a registered donor. I want to help save a life. I want to help restore some health. I want to be a part of, even in my transition, to give some other family some hope.
Let's go to another live question that we have from our audience. What's your question?
Can I donate organs if I contracted COVID-19?
Very good question.
Very good question. The answer to that is yes. Persons that have contracted COVID-19 and that are still with us, living with COVID-19, they are matched with persons that transition from COVID-19. Another comparison, those persons living with HIV and AIDS, they're able still to be registered donors that they may be able to help other persons that may need a liver or a kidney, that are living with HIV and AIDS. And so there is no disqualifiers, age, gender, preference. There is no barrier to participating in being a registered donor.
So the truth is, if I had COVID-19, I can't pass it on to someone else once I've passed. My organs are still valid.
Yes, and it would help another person who is on the waiting list that has already contracted COVID-19 and living sustainably with it. That individual's organs can be transplanted, yes.
Okay. Ms. Morrison, when people come to your office to get, first of all, what are some of the forms that if I came to your office, what would I need to come to your office to get, and how would I? Now that there's COVID-19, this huge pandemic, a lot of people don't want to come out in public. So what do you suggest?
Well, we try to do as much contact as possible with families who need our assistance because of the loss of a loved one by telling them to go to our website. There's a list of questions there that they can answer and transmit to us. There's paperwork on our website. It's at www.portsmouthva.gov, and they click on courts, and then it comes up with circuit court and then probate. And so there are a list of forms that we ask you to complete that are on that website, and you send those to us electronically. Ms. Daltrey, who is our probate clerk, receives those. We then contact the individuals, and we go over with them and discuss from the information that they provide us what they need to do next. It may very well be, if it's a situation where the estate is really not that great and we've lost a loved one, and the real thing that we're trying to get to is to their bank account, because we really need access to those funds to even be able to arrange for the burial. That may not require that you do a visit to our office, depending on how much is in that bank. If it's not a large amount, if it's like under $25,000, you may be able to do a small estate affidavit, and your bank will accept that. And we can tell you how to go online, pull down that paperwork, fill it out, complete it yourself, have it notarized, and take it to the bank. If there is no notary that you know in your community, in the city of Portsmouth, we notarize your paperwork for you for free. So you may have to put your mask on and come down to the courthouse, because we are open our normal hours and we provide full service. Walk in the door, tell someone at the front desk that you need this document notarized, and we will notarize it, and you'll be on your way to the bank to transact your business. And many times with questions that people have, because there are a lot of myths out there. I'm the oldest, therefore I should handle all of the business.
So that's not true.
That's not true. That is absolutely not true. If your parents or if your loved one left a will, they have named an executor in that will. That's the person, whether it's the baby of the family or the oldest of the family. That's the person who we have to deal with, who has to transact the business. If there is no will, and we call that dying intestate without a will, then there's a code section that stipulates who can inherit under the law. And in that case, we're going to want to deal with that person or persons who inherit according to the Code of Virginia. And there is no rush to the courthouse. If it's a will, there's no expiration date on a will. If it was 50 years ago and it comes to light and you bring it in, that will is still valid. In terms of the Code of Virginia, it clearly spells out who we look to as first in line. So if you lose your father and your mother's still alive and there was no will, then we need to talk to mama, because children can't jump in front of mama, because the Code of Virginia says that the spouse is the first in line unless there are other children outside of the marriage, and that just gets into inheritance. But we still need to deal with that wife. So it really becomes a thing of calling us if you don't understand what's on the website, and especially during this period of COVID. Call our office. Ms. Daltrey, who's here with me today and is our probate clerk, we will take the information, we will get the answers to your question, hopefully so that you don't have to make multiple visits down to our office, that when you come with all the documentation that we need. For example, we need proof of death, whether that be the obituary, a letter from the funeral home, or the death certificate. We accept any of those items as proof of death.
Oh, wow.
And then when you come, you also need to bear in mind that if there are other siblings, especially if, this is your last parent that's passed and there are other siblings, there is no will, you may want to have a discussion before you come as to who is going to be in charge, who wants to be the person that's going to handle the business. That cuts down on time. It also cuts down on a lot of grief, because you don't want to have to sit in the conference room with your mask on and talk to me for an hour or two to make the decision for you as to who's going to be appointed.
Absolutely. So Yolanda, here's a question it's a personal question here. So what happens if I have a will?
And if you have a will.
Yeah, but what if it hasn't been stamped? Is it still valid?
So there are 3 types of wills. The first will is a holographic will. A holographic will is a will that you can write yourself, okay? You can write that will yourself, you can sign it. The most important thing is that when your loved one bring that will down to our office, we're going to have to find 2 disinterested witnesses to prove that that holy graphic will is solely in the testator's handwriting. Okay. The second will is an attested will. An attested will has 2 witnesses. So you can write a will, you can type it, you can write it, but it must have 2 witnesses. The most important will is a self-proving will. The self-proving will has the testator, that's the person who's making out the will. It also has 2 witnesses, and it also has a notary. That is the most important will, because that will, you do not need anyone else to prove that the testator made out that will. So if you have a will and it does not have a notary, it is still a valid will. We would just need to get 2 disinterested witnesses, which means these people are not going to inherit under that will. So you would have to get 2 people, they would have to complete a deposition, get it notarized to prove that that is that person's handwriting, or all 3 people were there at the time when the will was made out, which would be the testator and the 2 witnesses. But the key thing is having that self-proven will, going to an attorney, having that self-proven will with the testator, the 2 witnesses, and a notary.
Okay. Let's go to a Facebook question. Somebody just asked a question on Facebook. What's the procedure after a person dies? Pastor, do they normally first come directly to the church if you've been working with them all along? What's the procedure? What do we do?
It depends on what aspect you're coming from. If the person dies immediately, one of the things the hospital always assists, the chaplains are great with this, on contacting a funeral home or contacting other family members. And so once the hospital releases the body, really the chaplains of the hospitals, they are really on point. If there's a trained pastor who knows the procedure, he can inform them. We can help you walk through the process of just having a funeral home come by and pick up the body, unless there's other things that are happening. And so, the church is there to assist in any area. We here at Grove, we have a full-time congregational care person who handles that and walks you through from the moment of sickness, if you notify us, to the point of death, funerals, and all of those things. And so the church really can provide a lot of information, but again, it is a team effort, and I look at the chaplain, I look at the courts, I look at LifeNet, and I want to really establish for churches a closer relationship because some statistics he just threw out to me were astonishing. And I didn't know that. I have reasons why people don't give. But again, so to answer your question and not get off, it is simply that we kind of walk them through notifying the funeral home, and that point at the funeral home will kind of let them know what to do from that point about the services, and we work in conjunction with one another. So if you let us help, it's an easier process than trying to figure it all out. We want you to grieve, not try to figure out every step, especially if we're there to assist you.
So, Vernia, you're pretty much in that same situation, too. A lot of times, you're probably the first point of contact the moment, if it's in a hospital or a lot of times they'll come directly to you. Normally, a lot of times, I guess, if they didn't have a home church or a pastor.
Yeah, I like what Pastor said, because it's kind of like a relay sometimes. When a family member has a church home, sometimes the pastor will be the first contact. The chaplains will also be out there to help you with some of these decisions. So picking a funeral home if you already don't have one, also deciding about organ donation if your loved one has not decided to be an organ donor. And then we connect you back to whatever resources that you need. So maybe that's your church home, maybe that's some bereavement support, maybe that's grief and counseling that's in the community. And so then we pass that relay off to the respective people who can also serve you as you leave the hospital. Sounds like Grove has a great relationship already, having a congregational pastor that's working with grief and also connecting with your pastor who is supporting you in all those processes. And we just come alongside that.
Okay. We've got some more live questions. I want to take another live question from someone in our audience. What's your question?
about the state requirements for cremation?
He was asking about cremation. That's a good question too. And I would assume now that a lot more people are considering cremation because I would assume it'd be cheaper as well. There's probably other things that go along with that too.
That is true. For a long time, you know, in the African American community, cremation was a no-no. I'm of the baby boomer generation, and I can't remember one person dying in my time of usefulness and coming up that were cremated. It's just something you don't do. We were miseducated spiritually about the resurrected body, and we didn't understand it. And so I think he asked about the state regulations about cremation, and there are some state guidelines about cremation. Some crematories around the area. More are coming because people are opting now, and I'm thankful for the newer generation, the younger generation, that they are now looking into cremation. Not only is it cheaper, it also conserves a lot more ground space. We don't, I don't want to look at an aspect, but God isn't making any more earth. This is what we have. The grounds aren't growing. And so while trying to conserve, we don't want to use all of our valuable land just to bury people and then it becomes of no use. So cremation has been a long, issue in the Black community. You just don't do it because when God comes back, the body can't be resurrected if it's burned up. That is a misnomer, because if you die and you're buried, your body goes back. That's why we say earth to earth, ashes to ashes, and dust to dust, because your body returns back to the matter in which it come from. And so I think there's a state code, so you just can't get it done anywhere. You can't go in your backyard and do it, of course. But not only is it is cheaper, because in our community, I've seen so many people have to put up GoFundMe pages just to bury a loved one. And there's nothing wrong with having cremation if that's available and the family really submits to that. I would definitely, that's one of my things. I don't mind being cremated. I think I'll put it in my will. It just saves time, it saves money, and it saves space. That's just how I look at it. But again, theologically, there must be some proper teaching on a resurrected body. That's why we didn't give organs, because I don't want to go to heaven with one eye. That's how we thought. If I go to heaven and I'm in heaven without a kidney, that's not, or one leg, that's not it. A resurrected body is complete. It is so much more fascinating and spiritual than the body we have on earth. So the church has hurt a lot of people and kept people ignorant and kept people sick because we haven't really taught truth. So I think go forward. Cremation, go forward. Use that money for education to pay off your debt. Go for it.
Use that money to educate yourself
on
understanding the importance of organ donation, of cremation, of just understanding the process of death and dying.
Yeah, I don't want to be cremated because I want people to look at me. I mean, we hear all kind of things. She's like, doesn't she look like herself? No, she doesn't, because when I last saw her, she was alive. And so, we want people to look like themselves, and we don't want to really embrace death. Don't they look the same? No, they don't look the same. So we really have to do a lot of teaching and compassionate teaching to really deal with the root of this issue, or we will have many more people having GoFundMe pages and carriage rides. I just found out that a carriage ride that some of our younger generation, they're doing in the horse and buggy, is $3,000 to go down the street with horse and buggy. $3,000 toward your son's or daughter's education or health care. We have a lot to teach our people.
So basically, when you do things, and I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with the carriage ride, guys.
There's nothing wrong with it.
But at the same time, if you're using money that really could go into some type of an investment, all of that is really for you, not so much for them. That's how I think.
And in our biblical practice, the people perish for lack of knowledge. And so if we're going to come from that place of practice, then we have to practice the way the precepts have been written. And so to think about generational wealth and the transfer thereof, why put a family in a financial strain when they could have approached it from a more economical perspective? And so these are the things that we need to start now as a community, specifically the African American community, to spend more time educating and passing on the correct thinking as Pastor has identified. We have to now approach things from a biblical perspective. If we know we're going to die, and people talk about death and dying, and I'm glad that's our focus today, but so many people want to go to heaven but don't want to die. Can I say that?
Absolutely.
Can I be transparent?
Please.
And so with that in mind, we have to start teaching and preaching more. There's a glory in your death because you have served well. Thy good and faithful servant. This is the stamp of approval process that I can step off this suit and step out on a cloud. And so that's where if we start to educate that type of thinking, especially in the millennial generation, they're now tired of hearing us. They're spending more time watching us. So let's be the examples under their watch that helps them be stronger as a community.
That's a good word. That right there is so important, for all of us to hear. It's the posture that we have to leave for the younger generation. Who are we and what examples are we setting when it comes to that? I was looking at YouTube question. If a person has a medical and physical power of attorney and a family member is terminally ill, can the person with power of attorney decide when to take them off life support? Who wants to take that question?
Ms. Morrison.
Normally, the power of attorney, it depends on what type you have, but it normally does not include the ability to make that life or death decision. Normally, the power of attorney, when it's granted, is dealing with the ability to handle your business affairs, the ability to make like business binding decisions. If you have a bank account, you may decide that you're going to add your person who's a power of attorney onto that bank account so that they can pay your monthly bills and do that. And it depends on what type you have, because there are some, the durable one is the one that pretty much covers most things. But if you're really trying to give the power to make that life or death decision, then you're probably talking about a medical directive as opposed to that power of attorney. And a lot of people think that the power of attorney is giving them control over the estate. Power of attorney ends upon death. That individual closes their eyes, takes their last breath into the power of attorney. So you can't come to our office with the power of attorney and say, well, my mom left me this power of attorney, so I'm here to handle her business. And just to piggyback off what you said about the economic piece, we try to encourage people to understand that probate is only going to deal with those things that are solely in the name of the decedent. Only those things. So say, for example, you have a bank account and you put a POD, payable upon death. I don't know about other people, but I'm funny about my money. So my children nor Johnny's name is on my bank account, okay? But payable upon death, Johnny Morrison can have everything I got, okay? I don't mind. So you do a POD. So if you've got $50,000 in the bank, Ms. Daltrey's not going to ask you about that $50,000 if you got a payable upon death, because that's going to that individual. or if you put someone else on the bank account as a co-signer. You close your eyes, then the other person remaining on the bank account, that $50,000 goes to them. Many times we do our benefit packages before we even get married.
Yes.
And we forget all about that we put my mama down to be the beneficiary. Mama been dead 10 years.
So who does it go down to then once you never changed it?
It becomes a part of the estate. So if that's a $100,000 policy, now you're talking to Ms. Daltrey about $100,000 at $1.33 per thousand. That's what you're going to pay me just to handle that estate. Where if you updated the beneficiary, that's outside of probate. I don't care about it. You don't even have to tell me about it because it's a beneficiary in place, and that's going to be paid directly to that beneficiary. That's what's called keeping your paperwork in order. And you should review it from time to time because things happen in our lives, you know? We lose loved ones, and we need to make sure we keep it updated and current so that we are only dealing with those things that are solely in the name of the decedent, the person who died. If you take care of the other stuff, money in the bank, you got a POD or somebody else's name is on that account, I don't care. I don't care whether you got $25 or $100,000. I don't need to know. That's not part of probate. It's outside of it.
Is there, Yolanda, is there anything, when someone, is there anything that people assume, I think, and she just brought up a question here, that you already know everything that's already out there. You know, they'll say, well, I know you already know that she owned this house. I know you already know this. If the paperwork is in order, what is considered paperwork for you?
So the paperwork that you want to bring into our office is most definitely the original will. Okay, you want to bring that in there, the death certificate, like Ms. Morse has already stated. But you also want to know what your loved one has. You want to know what bank account they have, what bank they use. We had a gentleman one time who had Alzheimer's, and he thought that his children was stealing his money. So he kept changing banks. And so when he passed away, his children did not know what bank he had. So it's important to be in connection with your loved one and know what bank they have. Do they have an Edward Jones account? Do they have stocks? Do they have bonds? Making sure, like Ms. Morrison said, putting a beneficiary up there, putting a POD up there. The only thing that you cannot do with a POD and a beneficiary, you cannot transfer real estate. With that, what Ms. Morrison stated earlier, you can transfer it through a will, and you can also do something called a death deed. So therefore, if you do a death deed, that piece of property will transfer to whoever you left it to in that deed. And those are the things that you do not have to come see us about and also pay that $1.33 per thousand. So it's good to know sit down and have a conversation with your parents and find out what their assets are. And make sure that there's a beneficiary up there, make sure if it's a joint account, and make sure that there is a POD on those accounts.
So to the two of you, Pastor, and Alvernia, is it your responsibility to an extent, if nobody else does, to say, hey, get your stuff in order? What do you tell them? How do what do you say to them?
Well, I think one thing is what you're doing right now. It's raising the awareness. The conversations that we're having right now, until I've been to Grove, I don't think I've had this experience where you have all the parts together. You have your pastor, you have the chaplain, you have the lawyer, you have the living will, the will. And so just beginning the conversation, I like that someone said that, that's the first start. Going home and saying, hey, I learned this thing today at church, and can we talk about it? I did my advanced directive just going to the doctor. I'm not sick. I feel well, reasonably well. But my advanced directive is on file at my primary care physician. And so if anything happens to me right now, people would fall all apart. But guess what? they would have my documentation that they can work with. And it makes it easier. One thing that happens at the hospital all the time is that people pass away, and because they have no idea what assets they had, who they were married to sometimes, what they wanted in death, what they wanted in life, people have this big fallout at the hospital because they had no idea about anything the person wanted.
I'm sure you see that a lot.
That's daily, right?
It's got to be a name for that.
Yeah, grief. And grief shows up so many ways.
Yes.
But the families that I see start the grieving process the best are the ones that said, Mom wanted to go to this funeral home. She didn't want to have CPR done. She didn't want to be left on that machine. Y'all know she didn't want to be on a ventilator. And when they pull out these advanced directives and they pull out the will and they have all these documents, they can just begin to grieve. They're sad, but they don't really have to fight and question what this person wanted. It makes it easier to know that you are honoring your loved one because when they were alive, they told you what they wanted. And that's the highest honor. You can send someone out with a beautiful home going, knowing that we did everything that they wanted us to do.
Wow. For me, I think love means responsibility. Love is not just an emotion. Love is very heavy. And loving someone means that I also want to be responsible for their self-care. Once I leave, I don't want to leave my family in additional stress and grief because I have not done what was practical. We are a triune being. We are mind, body, and spirit. And all three require certain influences and certain treatment. And so therefore, we have to make sure that we teach people that every aspect of your life must be in order. To leave my family without any clear direction, it is doing them a disservice. I should let them grieve and make sure that they understand truth. I tell my family now, I say, if I could do it, and it's not legal in the United States, if I ever get Alzheimer's or dementia, I don't know you all, just let me die. Just take me, that's just my personal thing. They said, no, I'm letting you know that if it does become legal, I'm gonna have it in writing. So we have to teach our people truth, that dying is not the worst thing. We say to people, God needed another rose in his rose garden, so he took them. That is not accurate. We build hope off of fiction, and fiction doesn't last as long as truth. And embracing the reality that my loved one has gone to be with God. And Paul says it. So I think I'm enjoying this, but it is hard. We've been doing this for many years to get people in our community to even get a will. You know, it's not based upon class. I mean, Chadwick Boseman didn't have a will.
That's right.
I mean,
I was going to bring that up.
It's not class. I don't know what it is that we really don't understand the value of putting things in order. And I'm not saying that we are the only ones, because I'm quite sure we're not. But I'm saying that Black America, I deal directly with them on an ongoing basis. And this is what I hear. We have done free wills at Grove. We've encouraged medical directives, organ donors. You know, I'm an organ donor. Let's go with it. I want to live on. I want to see you and not be here.
Yes,
You know?
yes.
If that makes sense. You know, but yeah, it goes on. A lot of work, but love, basically love is a responsibility too.
You mentioned Chadwick Boseman. I was so going to mention that when he passed away, there wasn't a will. But he was in his 40s, so he wasn't expecting it. But then again, with the disease that had started progressing,
I know.
we have to...
But Jesus was 33. I mean, he died and he rose again. But at what point do we? There's no. We RSVP, but there's no real date on it.
Right. We've got to be realistic and stop assuming that, well, I'm only 30, you know, I've got time. I've got time. And I'm sure that people always assume that they have time, more time than we have. You brought another question to mind too, and I have friends who are listening today who both of their parents had dementia, and their parents were not comfortable making the decisions even before the dementia, and so by the time the mother passed, they had 1,000 things to do. And then the following year, and the father already had dementia. So the father passed this year in the middle of COVID with dementia, and nothing had been put into place. What do you do at that point when there is no one to put things in place? What do you do at that point? That's gotta be a tough place.
I think when you see that your parents are getting older, it is one of the hardest things as a parent to give up control, okay? I tell my daughters all the time, while I am now of sound mind, that you need to understand if there ever comes a point in time in my life where Johnny and I cannot look after each other, that you have to do the right thing. You have to go to the court. You have to petition the court to give you guardian conservatorship over us. Don't feel bad about it, because we're telling you now while we have sound mind. A lot of times when people have dementia, they don't realize that they can no longer function the way that they used to. They cannot handle and control their business. Guardian conservatorship is critical. A member of that family needs to step forward, and it needs to be someone who understands how to handle business, how you're going to make sure that the bills are paid, how you're going to handle any decisions that come up, because that's going to give you not only control of the person's body, but also the fiduciary control over all of their finances. And so when that happens, a member of the family, one of those children, or if it's multiple children, they need to sit down and talk about it and discuss which one of us is most capable. And I always try to counsel families, solve your differences outside of the court.
Yes.
Do not come to the court with 5 of you and everybody wants to be the guardian conservator, because it's just going to draw it out. And now the individual who's going to make the decision may not know very much about you other than what's written down in the document and how you presented yourself in court that day. And you know, some of us can get real carried away. So the wrong person may not get it. So you need to sit down as a family, make that decision, and then come to the court where we've discussed it. We've already had our arguments at home, outside of the court. And this is the one who needs to be appointed guardian conservatorship. Because after all, that person's going to be responsible for making the decision for the parent that you both love, that you all love. So you want the best for them. You want the person who's capable. And trust that your sibling is going to do the right thing. So I always say that that's a hard thing, and we do see parents who can't handle things anymore. And if the family can't decide, then the court can appoint an outside entity.
And do you really want that?
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And if it's turned over to a lawyer, it's not free. I hope y'all understand that. If they are the guardian conservators over your parents' estate, they're going to get paid for administering that estate.
Nothing's free.
It's not free.
Not even your arguments.
Whereas if a member of the family, y'all can work it out, and one of you are going to take care of it, then you're not going to be charging what the legal rate is per hour when your sisters and brothers want to call up and ask what happened to $50. But if that lawyer is doing it, they're going to charge you the legal rate, whatever the going legal fee is for that 30-minute conversation about that $50 that you wanted to talk about. So people need to think about that.
Yeah. We need to think about a lot of things, and that's so important, especially in today. We want you to ask more questions on Facebook and on YouTube. But we've got another live guest who has a question for us today.
When does the power of attorney end and when does the will begin?
The power of attorney ends upon death. And the will takes place once it is brought in and it's probated. Once we put it to record, then the will kicks in. A fallacy that some people do, they were named the executor in the will, but they never bring the will down to the court to have it recorded. So there's no record of the will. If you don't put that will to record, then the person's wishes cannot be executed. Like Ms. Daltrey and I both have said, if the real estate was supposed to be sold and divided among all of the heirs, if you never bring the will in, we don't know that. There's no legal record of it. The property is still in the name of the individual. Because there's only two ways in Virginia that you can transfer property. It's either going to be by a deed, like when you first bought the house, that deed of bargain and sale, or it's going to be by a will, or another probate matter, like if we do a list of heirs or a list of heirs for real estate affidavit. It's got to either go through probate or my deed department.
So if I have a will, but I haven't registered it, it doesn't matter.
Well, whoever your executor is needs to know where that original will is.
Okay.
You know how we put stuff in the shoebox, right?
We all do.
Yeah, if it's in the shoebox, you need to tell that executor exactly which one of them 100 shoeboxes you got in that closet that will is in.
Wow. And you should never act as an executor until you bring that will down. Sometimes people will go to try to sell real estate and state that they are the executor. And you are the executor because you named in the will, but you have not come down to our office and taken an oath and been bonded.
That's right.
Well, that's what qualifies you to become the executor of the estate, and then gives you the authority to act on your loved one's behalf.
That's exactly right.
Now, along that line, too, this question came to mind. Well, I'll tell you what, because I think it's someone inside the room. Can a family member make the decision to donate the organs of a loved one after death?
Yes. That's at LifeNet Health, our practice is we have a life coordinator that when we receive a phone call from any hospital, we then have a staff person deployed, and they come in and they're interfaced and they introduce the reality is that loved one right now is not a registered donor. However, the opportunity is still there, and they take the time to explain, being sensitive to the time that they're in and the time ramifications that are involved in any organ or tissue donation that could take place. So we have staff assigned to every hospital in the state of Virginia to be rapid responders when there's a death and the person is not a registered donor.
Do you verify? How do you verify that this person is the person who has the authority to make that decision?
The standard protocol is there's either a medical POA and or the spouse, and we go through that pecking order of those that are in the position to make the decision on that loved one. And then from that process, we engage them in what organs possibly could be donated to save some lives. And at that point, every day in every hospital in the state of Virginia, if there's a donation made, we wait till the end of the day, end of the shift, within a 4-hour time frame, and that's when we actually go to surgery and participate in receiving the donation. Meanwhile, we've contacted the individuals that would be gifted the donation, and that process is managed totally separate outside of LifeNet Health. There's a company called UNOS, and they're actually based in Virginia. They are the keepers of the list. We have no control over who's on the list. Everyone is coded in by a number. There's no identification or identity or any biases, and we just report to UNOS that there's a potential donation coming in, and is there a potential candidate on the list that could benefit from the donation. So the list is totally separate outside of LifeNet Health. LifeNet Health is strictly governed by the federal government to be the recipient of any donation that comes in.
So, and that brought to mind a question to you, Alvernia. When you counsel people at their bedside, are you able to speak to them about possible organ donation?
I am not allowed to encourage you to be an organ donor at the hospital. What a chaplain would usually do is be a part of that conversation. One thing I would like to tell people is that if you complete an advanced medical directive, you can check a box that says, I'm an organ donor. And once you've completed this medical directive, you've chosen a medical power attorney, healthcare professionals or other family members can't do anything to change what you've already decided. So that means, let's say I do my advanced directive with my regular doctor or even at the hospital, and I've checked that I'm an organ donor. But let's say my daughter has came up to the hospital and she's like, no, I do not want my mom to donate her organs because she can't get it to heaven. A little bit like we talked about earlier. Well, when the doctors pull your medical directive, they have to follow it. And so you can even write in a space on your medical directive form, hey, I really haven't decided if I'm gonna be an organ donor, but I wanna leave this decision up to my oldest daughter, Susie. And so you have some flexibility with this decision. I can't really counsel you on that. That is something you need to do with your family or your pastor. But when you're at the hospital, I can be a part of that conversation just to help you honor how you want to honor your loved one.
So, Pastor, I'm going to ask you the same question. I mean, do you have, are you in a position to be able to suggest organ donation?
I would say I'm in position, but I don't assert my authority in that position. I think people trust us as pastors, and those who call us by their bedside and by family's bedside really do trust us. They oftentimes will solicit our opinion. And I think that there are moments when we had to simply allow the family to make the decision. If there are any theological concerns or questions, if I give them the authorization to do this, will my mom go to heaven without a kidney? And so it is at that moment where you can kind of explain to them that there is a new body, as it records in Corinthians. But I don't take liberty in trying to assert my level of compassion or connection with the individual. I think that's a family decision, and that's where I would leave it. I wouldn't try to coax them. If they ask me a question, I would answer honestly as I could personally, but not tell them what they should or should not do.
Okay, so Audie, in this case, well, you know, if you want more people to know about it, how do we get to them?
Today, DonateLifeVirginia.org. DonateLifeVirginia.org is the place that anyone can make the executive decision, even today, in our listening audience. It's a great opportunity to say, I choose to support the vision of saving lives, restoring health, and giving hope. It lines up with my faith practice. I don't want to have to leave that decision for my children and my grandchildren or my spouse. I can pull out my cell phone In less than 2 minutes, I can become a registered donor today at donatelifevirginia.org today. And so this opportunity, I'm so excited about this because it's challenging all of us to make decisions. It's challenging us to have conversation. We're on the heels of Thanksgiving and Christmas, where we usually come together and commune, even during COVID-19. There's so many Zoom calls going on. The family tends to connect in this quarter. What better opportunity to advocate for this kind of conversation to come up about to be absent from the body? One day, I'm gonna be present with the Lord. And I wanna make my executive decisions known to my family. I wanna be a registered donor. I have a living will. It has the 2 witnesses. It has been notarized. And I know who my executor of all my affairs are. That's a conversation now we as a people have to start having. It's almost, Pastor, like we need to create a book, a covenant family book, that every time we come together, let's commune together around the legacy of that individual. Because that's what we're talking about. And I know about my legacy. I want to give life to someone else. I want my last act to be my best act. And I believe it's a heroic act. And so everyone now can be a hero. We don't have to wait for the Transformers or Avengers. We can be a hero by choosing to be a registered donor today. LifeNet Health is the facilitator as your organ procurement organization, but donatelifevirginia.org is the website that you can make the executive decision today to become a registered donor.
What if they're a child? You know, there are a lot of children. Today is so tough where we're losing the lives of so many of our babies. Organ donation for other children. We have so many kids in hospitals. How do we handle that?
The legal guardians of those children are the individuals by law that are able to make those executive decisions. I was looking at Loma Linda Hospital in California, where a physician there had conducted some 25 different heart surgeries on babies. My wife's personally here in the state of Virginia. She's a registered nurse in labor and delivery. So I hear a lot about the challenges of new life coming into this world. And donation is a conversation that has to come up in some of those instances. It's a very sensitive time. But I believe the more educated people are, the more empowerment they have to make the decision to not be what I would classify, and it's not a harsh word, but it's a reality. And we shared this earlier. If we can take our faith and match it with our feet, we can come out of our selfish nature to try to keep things that are not ours to keep. Donation is a great act of kindness, love, and compassion. And today, I believe our listening audience has heard the clarion call. Today, you can be a hero and register to be an organ and tissue donor today.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's take, we're going to wrap up in just a few minutes, but let's take another question from our live audience.
What are the federal requirements for cremation?
What are the federal requirements for cremation? Yeah, I never thought about that, really.
I definitely don't have that information. That's one that I have to research. What are the federal guidelines for cremation? I don't know.
It would require naturally a death certificate as a first verification of death, to my understanding. For cremation, at that point where the family has to make the executive decisions on where the remains will be released to. And normally in the hospital settings, the awesome chaplaincy teams are available to facilitate that process, and they're there to do whatever the wishes are of the family. I've seen where they say, just we want to release it to the mortician. I've seen situations where they say, contact the Richmond Cremation Society. It's a family decision that's facilitated under the auspices of chaplaincy, to my understanding.
Okay. As we prepare to wrap, because I think we've disseminated so much information today. We could go on and on, but we know that we just want to thank you for the amount of time that you've taken on this Saturday already to be with us, because we realized that you didn't have to. Let's go down the line and give your information as to how, if you want to give up your wrap-up closing statements, how people can actually, for what you do, as well as how people can maybe contact you or if they have questions.
Well, one thing I want to say is that you can do an advance directive or appoint a medical power attorney at your primary care physician office. When you go to just see your doctor for your annual, your physical, you can say, you know what, I want to complete an advance directive. I want to pick my medical power attorney. It's that easy. And so you can do that at any doctor's office. Let's say that you also go to the hospital a lot, or maybe you're there for a procedure. You can always ask for the form. There are people at your hospital, whether they're chaplains or they work for maybe social work. There are other departments in the hospital who can help you to have this conversation and to fill out the form. When it comes to chaplaincy, most hospitals will have someone on staff who works as a chaplain to help you facilitate these conversations. And so let's say you really want to have this conversation with your loved one, and you're saying, I don't know how I'm going to do it. If you can stop for a moment and talk to your nurse or talk to the physician and say, do you all have a chaplain on staff that can help me to have this conversation? And so we are usually there, or usually can call us in to facilitate the conversation, to help you be there for these difficult conversations that we're talking about having, to make sure that you have people that are there to help you to honor and respect the values of your loved one. And so you can also find advance directives online. Usually it will change from state to state. But if you're in Virginia, virginiaadvancedirectives.org, and you can print the form off and fill them out with your family members. This conversation, I would like to reiterate, it's best to happen when you're not in a crisis. It's best to do this conversation when you're at a place of finishing wrestling with your theology and the myths, and you've come to an understanding that I really want to value what it means to take care of my loved one the best way. I want to do things that they thought were important to them, even all the way in death. And so I encourage you to have these conversations and know that you have support when you're ready to do it.
Pastor?
Wow. Closing comments for me. I think that we have to be willing to engage in the uncomfortable by being educated on spiritual and biblical truths. Everyone who enters the hospital may not leave the same way they came in. And as we are believers, as Christians, I think that we have to put our principles into practice. It will help somewhat with the grieving process. Nothing would eliminate the grieving process. But having a biblical and spiritual, a proper biblical and spiritual understanding of death and resurrection will help us really maneuver through the painful valley of death. I think that we have to speak truth and hurt. Most of us are afraid to hurt. Most of us are afraid to really grieve. But until we are at that point, honestly facing it, we will never get over it and never be healed from the grief that has already happened. And we sometimes will extend our grief by not having a proper biblical and spiritual understanding. Paul says to be absent from this body is to be present with God. And that's a lot to say, because I've seen too many preachers name it, claim it, and saying that they're going to get up from this place, and everyone doesn't get up. And we end up hurting the belief system of another person because we told them that mama was going to walk out of this hospital, yes, and mama did not. The truth of the matter is, people do die, and the Holy Spirit will escort them who are believers to the throne of God.
And a good point. Yolanda, before you do your wrap up, I want to make sure we cover the military as well. And someone asked the question, can you donate organs if you lived in a country that perhaps had mad cow disease? Who would take that question?
In a separate country outside the United States?
Yes.
Currently, the federal government of the United States governs all organ procurement organizations. And so if they happen to be outside of that parameter of influence, then we would have to be able to assess that country's guideline on organ, because there's different geographical laws that govern different countries. And so some believe in buying and selling organs. That's not the way of America. That's a myth, not a fact for America. So it's on a country by country, case by case basis.
Okay. If you want to do your wrap up while you're already talking, and then we're going to come back to Yolanda.
Surely. I just want to talk about, we've talked about death and dying, but I want to talk about real quickly in my closing remarks, about the immune system markers. Every person has markers that are used to match a donor with the recipient. And so in looking at that from that perspective, I want to challenge us to think about living donors as well. So oftentimes in our local churches, we have persons that are on the waiting list. And we know that they're battling health maladies, but we have an opportunity to help restore their health as a living donor. And so that registration process is going through a practical process that may be able to give someone extended life, giving them extended hope and restored health. So let's not eliminate the thought of considering being a living donor. It doesn't have to be someone that's related to us. It's the fact we as believers, we practice acts of kindness. And to register as a living donor, that process is still yet available. If you hear about in my city where I pastored previously, one of my congregants, I put it out to the congregation that there was a need, the blood type, and the individual's character. Lo and behold, a 23-year-old young lady, African-American, in the United States Navy in San Diego, California, she went over to see if she was a match. Long story short, she was able to give a kidney to a 60-year-old man who had given his life to public service and empowering the community. We can do this as a community, but we have to become more educated, and we have to take on a greater responsibility of loving our neighbors the way we love ourselves.
Very well
That's
said.
my closing remark.
Very well said. Yolanda?
The most important thing that you want to take away from probate is to, just like the chaplain said, have a conversation with your family. Have a conversation with your family. Let them know, what are your assets, what are your desires, what do you want? And the other piece is, you want to go see an attorney. You do not want to sit home and try to create that last will and testament on your own. And you do not want to find one that's online. The most important thing is to go see an attorney. Let that attorney prepare that last will and testament for you. Making sure that your loved one knows where that last will and testament is. And be careful who you consider to be the executor of your estate. So that is, if you don't learn anything else from probate, make sure you go see an attorney and have that attorney prepare that last will and testament for you.
And I would just like to encourage individuals to take the opportunity now on like your bank accounts and your life insurance policies. Keep your beneficiaries updated. Make sure that on your bank accounts that you either have a POD or someone else who's on that account with you that can be responsible. People work extremely hard for what they get in life. Most of us are not born with a silver spoon. So we have worked extremely hard. And that process of probate is your opportunity to decide how you want your stuff to be handled, who you want to give it to, what you want done with it. And so it's a very serious decision. Think about it and then put it into action. And if you do some of those other things that we mentioned today, then you won't be paying me a lot of probate taxes. And those funds will go towards your family or whoever, the organization, whatever you said you decided you wanted to happen with your worth. So we encourage people to really think hard about it and prepare for it before it happens, because it's too late. By the time you're ready for probate, you are no longer with us. So take care of that business ahead of time. And I'd just like to say a thank you sincerely to Grove Church, because they have been offering these kinds of opportunities to the citizens here in the city of Portsmouth for a number of years, inviting us to come in and talk along with other organizations to provide the kind of knowledge that our citizens really need. And they need to take advantage of it and put it into action, not just listen to this workshop, but literally put it into action.
Put it into action. I think that's probably the best way to wrap it up. Put it into action. You've had so many people on this panel today who have given so much information, who've helped to guide you through a very difficult period. We hope we have done a good job of doing that. If you have other questions, now you have information on how to contact these people. Do what you can to make the situation a lot easier, a lot more palatable. We want to thank our Facebook and our YouTube, as well as our live guests who have been here today. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful evening.